Hey, shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable. Hey, we don't promise to have all the answers, but we're going to have a lively discussion. All right. So that's what we can promise you. We're looking forward to it. Tonight, we're talking about, the mark of the beast and watch the water and snake venom and a whole bunch of stuff. And to get through this amazing topic, I have my blurry friend, John Haller. John,
What am I blurry for?
I don't know, but you are. You're all blurry.
Hang on a second here.
Must be a conspiracy. Yeah, while you're doing that, let me just remind people, hey, if you guys want to sew into this ministry, that'd be awesome. You can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp. Give as little as $2 or as much as you want. That is really awesome. Helps, keep the lights on, internet, all that stuff. We do thank you for that. Encourage you to get the app, the Way Congregation app. It's got great stuff. You're going to love it. A lot of free resources as well. And guess what? Dun, dun, dun. This right here.
Yeah. Corrupting the Image.
Corrupting the Image 3. This is an amazing book. Okay, I just finished the audiobook for number 1 and number 2. So check those out. So if you're like, I'm driving all the time and I want to listen to it, now you can do that. Okay. So those are on Audible, or you can just go to Amazon, look up the books, and you can get them right from there. And this one, I am just about done. So I've been recording like crazy. I'm editing, to get those weird little pauses out and that kind of stuff. And that should be up in maybe a week and a half, something like that. So pretty excited about that. Do check that out. Now, you might say, well, gosh, Doug, you're always talking about this book. Yeah, but that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, so this is the book, that you really want to check out if you're interested in this topic, because I've put like a decade, and a decade's worth of research into this topic. So kind of excited. All right, John, glad you're back. You're not fuzzy anymore. You're not
if I go fuzzy, it's because I want to be anonymous. So has it been just a decade, though, that you've been researching it? Because in the video, they quoted an article that you'd written back in 2012.
Yeah, well, that's a decade. But
I think when we first met about 2014 or so, that I remember we talked about this, and I remember I'm pretty sure I had a conversation with you that I thought that what you had said was very worthy of consideration and analysis and research and that type of thing, but that eventually I thought somebody might do what we're seeing and what we're going to talk about tonight, that they might lift it and use it out of context. And this is a problem in the church all the time, is people, the theory that I have, or the observation that I have about a lot of people, and I'm not necessarily putting you in this category, Doug, but as people study something and they become very, very knowledgeable about it. And in fact, I think I said this at the Prophecy Forum conference in 2014 in Dublin, Ohio, on a panel with Krieger and Bill Salas and the Hagmans and Chris Putnam, that people write a book and they turn it into a hammer, and then they see everything in the world that happens becomes a hammer, a nail that they can pound on with that hammer of knowledge that they have. And I think the video that or the series of videos that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight on this theory about what is causing this problem in the world, and because of censors and that type of thing that are out there, we have to be kind of careful about the way we talk about that, because we don't want to get hammered by our artificial intelligence inspired and controlled tech overlords that control, try to control what is said, that may be different from the narrative. So we're not telling anybody to avoid any kind of state approved treatment for what I will refer to as Charlie Vector 019er. We're not trying to tell anybody to do that. That's an individual decision that you can make. But we're going to talk about a theory, because I saw the video this week. The video is called Watch the Water. It was put out by Stu Peters. He is interviewing a chiropractor in that video named Brian Ardis. Now, Brian has been involved with some of the people who have alternative ideas as to how to deal with Charlie Vector 019er. and he's spoken at a number of conferences and that type of thing. So he hooked up with a guy named Stu Peters, I believe, who's out of Minnesota. And he also hooked up with Mike Adams and did a series of interviews with Mike Adams. And the theory that he has come up with in this video is that it's not really the little tiny thing that makes you sick of Charlie Vector, but that it's snake venom. And he looks at this and he says the snake venom, there are certain peptides in snake venom. They're similar to the peptides that are found in people who are suffering from the disease that you get with Charlie Vector 019er. And therefore that it's not really a virus, it's snake venom, and it's parts of snake venom that's being injected into people with the state approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. I think you all know what that is. And that this snake venom is causing the problems. Now, not everybody's getting that state approved treatment. So then the question becomes how are people getting this? And in the initial Watch the Water video, it was suggested that this is coming from the water system. And he makes that conclusion. And if I'm misrepresenting him, that's fine. I'm doing the best I can. I've watched the thing about 6 or 7 times to try to understand, what all it is that he has said. So he points to the fact that the CDC is testing wastewater to determine if they're finding this Charlie Vector. I don't know exactly what it is they're testing and what they're finding, but then they say, well, we found an increase in this particular substance. And then they were able to predict when a certain area will have an outbreak. Now, they're not testing every water system in the country. I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. Somebody wrote to me and said, yeah, I think it is in the water. And there are, in my area, there are 50,000 customers, and we have 4 different water systems. And there's a picture of a reservoir. I think this is from someplace in Canada behind me. I live 600 yards from a large reservoir lake here in central Ohio. And so the theory is that they must be putting this, if you're finding it in the water, and this is what Brian Ardis says, and I think this is sort of a big weakness in what his argument is, that, well, they're finding it in the wastewater, it must be in the water, but they're testing wastewater. That's sewage. They're testing sewage. And if you don't know where sewage comes from, figure it out. And sewage is not water. It's a wastewater. And then all these water systems have what they call wastewater treatment facilities, where they go through a very long, involved process. And I know a little bit about it because I represented, early in my career, I represented a guy who was sued for improperly designing a water and wastewater treatment system for a town in Indiana. And I spent years on this. And so you learn a little bit about all the different things that they have to go through. So, and when you see a follow-up video from Stu Peters, in the background, what he has this picture of people in hazmat suits with barrels, like 55-gallon drum barrels with radioactive symbols on them, dumping them into a reservoir behind them. And so the implication then is that, well, this must be in the water. They're dumping us into the water. Now, the question is, that comes up is that they are dumping this into every wastewater or every water system in the world. There's thousands of water systems. So when you analyze this, and I spent a lot of my career doing what we call toxic torts. And so when you do a toxic tort, somebody's exposed to a substance, and you have to determine, okay, what did that substance cause the problems that they have? For example, I had a very complicated case for many years, a guy who worked in a tool and die plant. And what he did was they had cutting fluids. They lubricate the metal as they're cutting pieces off, shaving pieces off of it. And it's very common for people to get, they're literally soaked in this cutting fluid. So I represented the manufacturer of the cutting fluid, and the claim was that this man had developed a disease called scleroderma because of his exposure to this particular substance. So what you do when you get a case like this, I spent a lot of time in the medical library going through medical studies and reports. I hired toxicologists to help out with the case. I think I had 2 toxicologists in that case, and I hired the leading scleroderma expert from the Mayo Clinic in the country at the time to say, did this guy's scleroderma come from exposure to this cutting fluid? And then once you start analyzing that, you get into things like, how much of this substance were they exposed to? How much was ingested by them? So to accept Dr. Ardis' theory about this being in the water, and I'm not even sure after listening to some follow-up interviews that he still is making the claim that it's in the water. I believe I saw an interview where he sort of said, well, I think Stu Peters added that. So that's, I'm not really on board with that. I'm not sure. And I think he's not sure because all of the doctors and scientists that he has worked with on his side of this raging debate about how to treat Charlie Vector 019er and whether there should or should not be a state-approved treatment for him, not a single one of those doctors has come out in support of him that I have seen. That's a problem. And I think that for this video to have had more credibility, it needed to have that kind of support. So Ardis has kind of backed away from it. But if you analyze the thing, is it in the water? You would have to look at what's the peptide or substance that's causing the problem. You have to isolate that. Then you have to figure out at what level is it toxic, and then at what level is it present. And immediately when I listened to this video, my conclusion was, where are the test results that show that this is actually in the water? You have to have that. Otherwise, it's just rank speculation, and it's not credible. And so if you're in a position, if you're on one side of the debate about how to treat this Charlie Vector thing, a video like this, I think, is very damaging to the people who have an alternative view, because it's really not supported. They don't say what I believe the peptide is, and I could be wrong on this. I listened to it a few times, like 6 or 7 times to figure it out. There was a claim that it's similar to the peptide that you get in snake venom, but similar is not exact. And we know that we're in a universe that was designed by God. So there's going to be some similarities between different parts of the animal kingdom. And it is true, I don't think there's any dispute, that in the body's response to Charlie Vector, some of these peptides are part of the immune system response. And that's why they're found at elevated levels in people. And the problem has been that they get to a level to fight this disease that people are getting, but they overwhelm the system. And so they have this thing called the cytokine storm that people have. And I've had friends who've died from this, and that's exactly what happened to them. It just overwhelms the body. So I think the thing to take away from what I'm saying is that this is an incredibly, incredibly complex analysis. And they have not, to my knowledge, they've not shown a single test result that shows anything of this in the water. And you have to, and think about this. There's always been a theory that terrorists and other people are going to attack us through water systems. But that's never really occurred. And the reason why it has not occurred is that it's very difficult to get to a toxic level in an entire water system that's continually being replenished and recirculated and treated. And then you multiply this by tens of thousands of these water systems all over the country. For example, Doug Hamp doesn't drink the same water that I do. Scott Harwell doesn't drink the same water that I do, because we all have different water systems and different sources. And some people have wells and that type of thing. So I think there's a huge amount of open questions about the theories advanced by Dr. Ardis in the video with Stu Peters. He also did a 3-part interview with Mike Adams. And in that, they talked about the snake venom. And now I think what I've seen happen is that they're sort of recognizing some problems with their original theory, I think. And now they're trying to focus on the snake venom, and now they're looking at things. They pull out a venom library that people have published through some of the companies that study these things, and that the pharmaceutical companies are studying snake venom, and they're injecting snake venom into people through pharmaceuticals. I don't think that that's accurate. They do use snake venoms in studying these things. They're highly stable, and there's actually been some good treatments that have come from this decades-long study that pharmaceutical companies have done. And I know we don't like a lot of what the pharmaceutical companies do now and what they've become, but there have been some treatments and that type of thing that have come about because of the study of these snake venoms. But now I see like Mike Adams is focusing on the snake venom part, because that seems to have the most traction, and it may be the one that's most fruitful for presenting the alternative theory. But I don't think they're there. As I listened to Ardis, I listened to this as a lawyer who's worked with toxicologists in many, many cases, and how I would approach this if I was defending or attacking a company that made a particular substance. And my opinion was when I was listening to Ardis was, if he ever got in front of a well-prepared lawyer who knew what he was talking about, he would have a very difficult time maintaining his position at a deposition. Now, the reason we've brought Doug, though, into this, Doug, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm just enjoying the talk. Keep going.
I just as quiet as I've never heard you. And I thought maybe my connection had dropped.
Still here.
But so at least posterity will have this. So, but in the third part of the interview between Mike Adams and Brian Ardis, this chiropractor, Ardis pulls out a printout from a web page, and he says, and I got this from Doug Hamp Ministries, and I don't know who they are, but they talk about this DNA, recombinant DNA, and some studies that were done. He goes through parts of Doug's article, and he says what they're doing is they're doing this, they're putting into people, it's changing their DNA. They're no longer human. And now and the implication is, and dramatic music starts playing and all this stuff. They don't really come out and say it per se, but they're saying that this is the mark of the beast. And so they quoted from Doug's, I think one of your earlier articles on this, Doug, from back in 2012.
Right.
And they were quite impressed with it, and maybe people are buying your book now because they want to see what you actually said. But so I thought I would bring, at least for the first part of this today, we would bring Doug on and talk about that. So let me just summarize. I'm not impressed by the video. I'm not impressed by the theory. I think it has huge holes in it. I think that the Stu Peters part of it was highly dramatized. I think it was overhyped. Now, I'm not saying that they're not going to be able to come and prove this at some point in the future. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, based on what I saw right now, they're not even close to this. And I've seen people like Dr. Corey, who was involved with Ardis and some of the big discussions they had about the alternative view of how Charlie Vector 019er should be treated, have come out with some pretty, I'm not sure how to say this in a nice way, pretty demeaning comments about the theory. And Dr. Corey is a medical doctor who treats these things. I've talked to some other medical doctors who treat this, and they just say he doesn't really know what he's talking about. And he does what people do sometimes in Bible prophecy analysis, to be honest with you. And this is always something that I try to avoid. And I know Doug tries to avoid it and Scott as well, that you come to your conclusion and then you go find everything is and you form a grid, you get like a pair of glasses, and everything that you see supports your view. So he finds this peptide and he says, similar peptide, hear this, do this, connect to all these different research articles, when I'm not sure that they're really connected. And I've not studied as much as this guy, but I'm just saying that if it was put in a court to defend this theory, I think that a well-prepared lawyer would slice him up on the witness stand, because the things are not connected. Now, whether a jury would believe it or understand everything that's being said, or that's a whole nother issue. What I'm just saying is that from what I've seen, I don't think it's a very supported theory. So now we come down to and by the way, too, let me just say this: I'm not attacking him personally. Okay, I don't know the guy. I'm not attacking anybody who's involved in this. I'm just evaluating their work and what they've published, and what I see and what my experience tells me are problems with it. And again, there's not a single study that they showed that said that, Wheat Ridge water system has this level of venom in it or this peptide in it. There's no study like that. And there's tens of thousands of these water systems, and there's water systems all over the world. And people might say, well, they don't have, the municipal water systems in large parts of Africa, and they don't seem to have had a problem with this particular illness. So maybe there is something to the fact that it's in the water. But then it also could be said that it seems like people that live in the sunny part of the earth, and believe me, Ohio is not the sunny part of the earth where I live. In fact, a brother of a farmer, I play golf with, and he said he was talking to his brother, and he said, we've not had 5 consecutive dry days in Ohio for over 3 years. And I believe that. If you go out to the mud field in the back of my house, it's not dry. So there's a lot of holes in this thing. There are a lot of things that I think people need to prove. And I think this is a indicator sometimes of what we need, how we need to analyze things, particularly as we're trying to fit pieces of things that are going on in the end times into our particular view. We got to make sure that we're just not cherry picking the evidence. It's pretty easy to cherry pick, but it's hard to really prove your case. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from on this. And now I will turn to the great Dr. Hamp, who will regale us and tell us why, what he thinks of he played the clip. So if you go to the third part of the Brian Adams interview of Dr. Ardis, you can find it on BitChute, I think, or Brighteon, part 3. And it's about 38 minutes in, they start talking about Doug's view of corrupting the image. So Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm flattered that they would quote me, but I really think that they quoted me completely out of context, because when I wrote that, of course, there was no Charlie Vector, right? That was something that was not even remotely being thought about. And my thesis has nothing to do with that. So I think that my thesis is not related at all to his thesis. And I make no claims about something being put in the water. I mean, we have to go with scripture. And I think what happens is that people say, well, it's pretty close, but close isn't good enough. It's going to be exact or it's not the thing, right? It's either this is it or it's not. There's no middle ground. There's no walking on the fence here. So my thesis, okay, I'll just kind of start from the beginning. I remember I was looking at Genesis chapter 6 and, kind of looking at it like for real, for the first time back around 2007, 8, somewhere in there. I was like, oh my goodness, this really is in the Bible, and I was wrestling with it. And then I went back to Genesis 3:15 and I was like, wait, God is saying he's speaking to Satan, right? He's speaking to the serpent, not just a garden variety snake. It's not a boa constrictor or a cobra. This is Satan, all right? And I prove that in Corrupting the Image 2, right? And again, I've told you guys, I'm not just trying to get a book sale. I want you to read it. I will send the ebook to you if you want it and you can't afford it. Write to me. I'll send it to you, right? I want you to see the evidence for yourself, right? Let's go back. Right. So in Revelation, what do we see? It talks about this great dragon, the serpent, right? I went and I examined those things. I went back as far as you can possibly go in history, written history, of course, back to ancient Sumer. And ancient Sumer tells us about Enlil. And guess what his epithets were? The great dragon, the serpent, right? He was known as Ushumgalu, Mushkushu, the Bashmu, right? This is all this dragon, snake, serpent, dragon kind of stuff. And it's all him. He was the serpent, right? There's no question about that. All right. And again, I go into all the detail and I show in the scriptures that this is talking about Satan, right? He's the god of death and all this stuff. So the whole idea that it would be actual snake venom from snakes that are crawling on the ground, I have nothing to do with that theory, nothing at all. Right. My theory is that Satan, just like the sons of God were doing in the days of Noah, that they were passing on their seed, their DNA, their genetic information to women and thereby procreating the Nephilim. That's my theory. And so then I just took it and said, well, wait a second. God is also speaking to Satan. So it appears that in the last times, Satan himself is going to have a seed. And the argument I make in Corrupting the Image Volume 2 is that he actually did that with Nimrod as well, and he will do it again with the beast. Okay, so and I explain in the book how when you study information science, Dr. Werner Gett, he explains in his book in the beginning was information. He says that information is a non-material entity that requires a physical medium. Right. So when you take the chalk or you take the marker and you write on that whiteboard or chalkboard, the information is non-material. Right. That's really important to understand. It's a non-material entity. But by using that marker, you're now using a physical medium to store information. Right. That's what's so amazing about it. So when we think of our double helix, that is the material storehouse. That's the hard drive, if you will, that's storing the data, right? We're kind of familiar with this, right? We can send an email. We didn't send anything. We just sent little packets of data, right? And what are those? Well, I don't know, right? I mean, we know what it is, but we don't, right? It's electrical impulses or something, but
all the stuff that's coming through the video tonight are packets of data that are then interpreted by a machine to give you a picture.
Yeah. And even, if you've ever maybe looked at a DVD or something like that, it's all sparkly and there's little tiny ridges in there and the laser's reading them. But what it's doing is just reading zeros or ones. And that is not something that you can actually touch. You can touch the little divots, but that's not the information. The information is non-material. That is what is so mind-blowing about this whole thing is that it's non-material. Okay, so when you start thinking of a seed, whether it's a watermelon seed or a sunflower seed or animal seed or human seed, it doesn't matter. It's all the same basic stuff, right? We're going down to chromosomes, and we go down to genes, and then we go down to the actual DNA or the double helix. Then we get to the nucleic acids, and then what? Well, then we get to this thing that you can't touch. It's called information, and it's stored in that physical medium. So the argument that I was making in Corrupting the Image Volume 1 is that, yes, Satan himself actually has seed, right? And that's what we're seeing in Genesis 3:15, I will cause enmity between you, Satan, and the woman, between your seed and her seed. Okay, so in the book, I examined this whole idea that the woman has seed. All right, well, women don't have seed. Yeah, they do. An egg is really the same as a sperm. It's that the sperm has a little tail, and the egg is like, the lunar base, right? But inside, they're both information. They're both the same thing, right? So, except of course, the sperm will carry the Y chromosome and not only the X, right? But that's the only difference. Otherwise, they're identical information, or kinds of information in a sperm and a seed, or in an egg. So that's what I was getting at. And so when you think about the seed of the woman, this is, of course, Jesus, right? So the antithesis of Jesus is, well, the Antichrist or the beast, right? That one who will be the son of Satan. And what is one of the epithets of the Antichrist? He's called the son of perdition, right? I mean, if you just take them a little bit more literal, you're like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And then in volume 2, I looked at the beast that was, is not, and will ascend out of the abyss. And what I discovered, blew my mind for sure, is that Nimrod, the rebel, right? In the ancient world, he was known as Ninurta, and his dad was Enlil. Enlil is Satan. And again, I'm not going to bring all the receipts here to explain everything for you. I always want to footnote everything I say, because people are like, oh, well, where does it say that? But I don't have time to explain all that. So check it out on my website or the book, whatever. Anyway, so Enlil is Satan, Ninurta is Nimrod, right? And in the ancient literature, Ninurta was the son of Enlil, right? And that's what's so incredible, is that you have this relationship between them. And many of the different things, there's this one known as Pabilsag. He's like the great ancient hero. Also Gilgamesh, he was known as the great hero, right? So these different titles are talking about somebody who went from being human to now being this God, right? And he somehow changed. And that's exactly what it tells us in Genesis chapter 10, is that Cush begot Nimrod, and Nimrod began to be a Gibor upon the earth, a mighty one. But if you look at it in the Greek, it says he's a gigas. He became a hybrid. He became half man, half God, or a demigod, if you will. And so there's something that's
Doug, can I interrupt you for just a second? So
Please.
Was it talking about
Nimrod
becoming? Was it he? Is that what he actually was, or was that what people thought he was? You understand the difference that I'm trying to ask?
Well, I think he literally changed. Yeah, and I think that's what the text is actually bringing out, is that he went from being standard human to being superhuman. He became a gigas. That's certainly what the interpreters of the Septuagint understood, is that he was no longer fully human. Right. The word gigas is where we get the word gigantes. Right. So it means of the earth. Right. So it's basically a god who originates from the earth. Another word for that might be titans. Right. So that's the same basic idea as the titanes, or the titans. But any of the demigods that we know about in Greek mythology, that's the basic idea, is that this person is half God, half man. According to, the Epic of Gilgamesh, he was actually 2/3 God and 1/3 human. I don't know how that works exactly, but that's what they said about him. And he was 18 feet tall. I mean, that's a pretty tall dude. And what do we find in the biblical literature, at least concerning King Og of Bashan, that he was about 15 feet tall, right? So Og, I think that it's possible. Well, anyway, I won't get into that. But anyway, the literature is telling us this, and we find in the Ugaritic literature, they talk about Mount Hermon as being the sacred mountain of this deified god of the dead, whose headquarters were in Ashdod and Edrei, right? And that's exactly what it says in the book of Joshua, right? So from non-biblical sources, Ugaritic sources, they're saying, oh, there's something special about this. Even though the name Hermon, it means that we're from Herem, and it means something that is set apart for destruction. And according to the book of Enoch, that is where the 200 angels came down in the days of Noah. And in Corrupting Image 2, I explain how the stele, or the inscription that was found on that mountain, there was a word that's hidden in there. It's actually a secret name of Enlil, of Satan, and it means death. I mean, it's mind blowing. And you start putting these pieces together. I mean, I was just writing the book and I'm like, this is blowing my mind, right? It's just, ouch. It's so cool, right? So that is this whole history. But really, and then of course, what I'm talking about in Corrupting Image 3 is I'm now bringing it up to, or, up to the future, right? Where what's going to happen. And I explain how, we've come through this series and we've had all this different stuff. And now Satan is going to do this thing. And I explain how this, I suggest how it's possible, right? I mean, I don't know until it happens, right? And my theory could be wrong. But I back up my theory with a lot of scripture. I back it up with a lot of science to the very best of my ability, right? So, but again, I could be wrong. But I think that there's some incredible stuff, right? So there was this guy named Chris out of Reno, Nevada. He had leukemia and he needed a bone marrow transplant. So some nice person from Germany, a man, donated bone marrow. And this forensics lab was monitoring Chris before he got the bone marrow transplant and after. And what they discovered is that the DNA in his blood began to change, that like a lot of his DNA. And then they even finally found that the DNA in his semen changed to that of his donor. And everyone in the lab and Chris himself are like, wow, it's pretty crazy that I can disappear and this other guy can appear. Now, how is that relevant? Well, remember that God says, I will cause enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. All right, so Satan is going to find a way to superimpose himself upon a human. I think it's sort of the foreshadowing, the overshadowing effect that the Spirit had on Mary, something similar to that Satan is going to overshadow the person of his choice and then impart his DNA into this person. And what we learned from Chris of Reno, Nevada, is that his own DNA can disappear and that of the donor can begin to take its place. And so that's what I'm suggesting, is that Satan overshadows himself on somebody. He then imparts this DNA. Now, I don't fully understand this because I've never gotten to see this, and I can't do it in the laboratory. I'm working with texts, right? And I'm trying to say, okay, how could this possibly work, right? Based on known science, I'm trying to say, okay, how could this potentially work? Okay, so again, I could be wrong, but I think it's a pretty good theory. So what I'm saying here is that the beast is going to be the one who is going to receive Satan's DNA. I don't think it's going to be like it was in the days of Noah, where you had the sons of God come and they had sexual relations with women, and then they procreated, right? The women got pregnant and had Nephilim babies, right? I don't think we're going to go back to those days. Rather, the beast is going to become an avatar for Satan. It's going to become a human demonic hybrid. And then his new DNA, he will then make available what we call the mark of the beast, right? So he'll take his superhuman DNA, he'll take it, he'll replicate it, and then he'll send it out to the world. And what's crazy is we have the technology to do this. We have DNA printers. They just need a little bit of sugar to basically use as their ink, if you will. And so if you have this source code, you could email it to people. Seriously, you could email it to people around the world. They would then print it on their DNA printer, and then they could then distribute it to people as they see fit. Now, that's my basic thesis. Okay. So it has nothing to do with snake venom and bad drinking water or whatever.
State approved treatments for Charlie Vector 019er and that
exactly.
Type of thing.
Yeah.
But see, this is but I told you, I think one discussion we had at one point, you probably may not remember, that I thought that somebody was going to pick up on this when, as we saw CRISPR technology develop, and they would say, oh, see, Doug Hamp, here's the theological, here's a scholar who supports the theory that I have. And understand, people, this is certainly not accepted across all of the evangelical world or the eschatology world. There are some people that really get pretty hot and bothered about it. that you would even bring it up and talk about it. And I'm willing to see, like with a lot of things in Bible prophecy, let's wait and see how this thing all works out. We don't know exactly how it's going to work out. We know that we see a lot of different things, but we also need to know that even some of my friends who I know would reject this talk about transhumanism and technocracy all the time too. And so so you have a whole industrial type system set up now for people who want to alter humanity. And does this play into the end times? And all I'm saying is, if Doug's thesis is correct, and others who hold that thesis, is that this was going on before the flood, God intervened. He intervened at Babel after the flood. And it may be that this is part of how God said, I gotta stop this again. Now, there's also this thing called the serpent seed theory that's been advanced by people. I think there's a guy named Arnold Murray at Shepherd's Chapel who said that the initial serpent seed was that the serpent seduced Eve and had sex with Eve, and that's how Cain was born of Eve. I believe that's how that worked. And I don't think the guy was right, but this is something that you see transmitted over generations through the church as a theory that people have. So I think we need to be careful. I think we need to study it. But we do live, and I think Doug covers this in his particularly in part 3 of his books on corrupting the image, that this transhumanism thing is just something very bizarre. I mean, go listen to Yuval Harari. I did a midweek update about 2 weeks ago. And in that midweek update, I played a series of quotes from people from the World Government Summit, which is tied to the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab, which are really just sort of the new, the new clothes on the old guys from the Trilateral Commission and that type of thing. This is what they've kind of morphed into. And then I played clips of Yuval Harari, one of which was from a talk he gave at Google back in 2015, which is absolutely shocking, because he gets up and he says, "Hey, it's great to see my friend here. I love coming to Silicon Valley because this is where the religions that control the world of the 21st century are being created or generated." Now, what is up with that? I mean, this is the guy's own words. And so, again, this is part of what I talk about, this convergence of all these different things that are happening. So I just think we need to consider it. I think we also need to analyze things. God gave us a rational mind. I don't know that I like the, a lot of times when these things come up in evangelical circles these days, and I think it's because of some books that were written that people sort of, I don't think they were correct in their foundational work, like knowing, experiencing God and that type of thing. People say, well, I feel in my spirit that it's correct. But I can tell you, for every time you say that, I could find a person, sometimes even myself, who would say, well, I listened to the guy and I thought he was a nut. That's what my spirit was telling me. So, there's two sides to that. So I think we need to be careful that we just don't say, well, I felt he was true. We have to be careful that we don't fall into this trap of confirmation bias. So because we don't like what's been going on over the last couple of years in society and culture, and the way they've come up with these treatments and lockdowns and mask and not mask and this and that, and 6 feet apart and all this other stuff, and we don't like that, just because somebody comes along with a theory, I don't think we should just latch onto the theory because it maybe helps support our conclusion that everything that's been done is wrong. I just don't think that that's the right way to do it. We have rational minds that we can sit and talk through these things. But I just have to tell you, I have watched things like the war in Ukraine over the past few weeks, and if you say something that sounds pro-Ukrainian, people jump on you, and then people say something that sounds pro-Putin, and you say, "Oh, you just like Putin. You're just a Putin lover," and all this stuff. And I'm like, I think we can be nuanced enough to not like any of the people that are involved in this, and that I know people are dying, and cities are being destroyed, and millions of people have been uprooted from their homes. And so I think we need to sort of take a step back and think through these things and talk through them without fighting with each other. And I'll just answer a question I saw from CZ. CZ, yes, I heard about this. I think it's a school in Australia where they're having trouble with a bunch of people. They have about 10 students, 10 females in the class. And I'm not saying that, that's just what the fact is. I'm not saying because I think females are more prone to this, but they're identifying as cats. And it's just absolute insanity of what they're doing. And I think when you see the transgender debate and this LGBTQ stuff, you end up with, they're trying to tear down all the norms of society, and maybe they're setting it up for this transhuman thing. I mean, I think the transgender thing is a lead-in to makes the transhumanism thing more palatable. And I will confess to you, my law firm is sponsoring a transgender LGBTQ legal seminar that takes place, I don't know, within the next week.
Wow.
And
let me
I
just
don't
jump
like
in
it.
on that, because
I don't like it. And that's the way it is. That's the world we live in. But I think part of that is it's softening people up for really bad stuff that's coming.
And transgenderism was one of the mystical, quote unquote, mystical qualities or powers that Inanna or Ishtar had, that she was said to be able to change men into women and women into men. She was surrounded by a retinue of homosexuals, transvestites, etc. And, that is the woman who's riding the beast. Okay. So, and we know that the beast and the 10 kings are going to burn the woman. They're going to hate her at the end of all this, right? So she's a necessary evil, right? As part of Satan's plan, right? And I kind of associate her as the lure to the hook, right? And, once the fish is on the hook, you don't need the lure anymore, right? The lure has a purpose, but once you got that fish, you don't need the lure. And she is the lure, in my opinion, to get humanity to take the mark of the beast. And what I'm suggesting in Crypting and Divine 3 is that when the two witnesses come, they're going to start saying, hey, world, get ready. The creator is coming back, and the world is going to interpret them as aliens. And they're going to say, well, you know what? We don't like you guys, and yes, you're very powerful, but we have this other guy, the beast, who can also fight you. And he eventually kills them, of course. And then they resurrect. And then guess what? Oh no, we're in big trouble, because they're going to go back and get their reinforcements. So then everybody needs to upgrade. And hey, if we've already been conditioned this long that you can be a cat if you want to, right? You can identify as whatever you want to identify as. Pick your gender, pick whatever, and it's all based on this notion that we have evolved this far. Let's keep evolving, right? That's the basic idea. We've evolved from the goo to the zoo to you. And why stop there, right? If you want to be something else, great. I mean, there was a documentary that came out on Netflix. I think it was called Inhuman. Oh goodness, it was about people wanting to become transhuman, and they talk about how people are very excited about becoming something other than human, right? They feel like, oh, there's the fetters of being human is so terrible, and so they're rushing to become something else. And so all of these things come together. John, you said there was a great convergence. I completely agree that there is a convergence coming of people who are pushing us toward this direction. So this is all stage setting, in my opinion, to when we finally get to that time of when the two witnesses come, and then finally when the beast shows up and destroys them, and then they presumably go back to get reinforcements, and then the world is actually preparing. That's what it tells us in Revelation, that the whole world is coming together to make war against Jesus, right? So they basically know what they're trying to do. The world is trying to stop a quote unquote alien invasion. The bad aliens are actually Jesus, right? So the script is reversed, right? Everything is flipped on its head. The good guys are the bad guys. The bad guys are the good guys, right? And so, we don't like Jesus, is what people will probably say. We don't, maybe he created things. Okay, well, just like the creators or the progenitors in the movie Prometheus, yeah, they got things started on planet Earth, but they're real jerks. We don't like them now that we met them, and we don't want anything to do with them anymore. So, but yeah, there's so much going on.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of really bad people out there that are acting.
Yes.
And I think we need to be aware of all of these things. And like I said, I spent a lot of time thinking about and looking at the theory that was advanced. I just don't think I don't think they've established yet. Maybe they will in the future. I'm not saying that they can't. I'm just saying, though, too, that some of the people that are involved with Dr. Ardis and others, and he came out with some ideas about one of the treatments for this Charlie Vector thing that make a lot of sense to me, and that a lot of other people have accepted and expressed concerns about. But the question I had when I listened to it is, if they're going to take this, they're not going to convince any people with this video that are making the decisions. That's one thing that we can come across. And my concern, though, is that they will use it to show that, everybody on the other side, they don't really do their science, they don't do their homework, and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think that I think the water thing is kind of not holding water, so to speak.
Well, this is the Chicken Little, the sky is falling syndrome, right? And, or the little boy who cried wolf. I mean, this is where I think that when we're not careful, we as Christians, when we're not careful with really taking a hard look at the data, then what they're going to do is they're going to start painting with a very broad brush. And so everybody on this side, if you're a Christian, you're just wacko. And I think that's very unfortunate, right?
And you see the progression, Doug, sometimes where people say something they'll say something, on a popular thing that, that they're opposing, and we're opposing it because we're a Christian, and nobody listens to them. So then what's the next step is they come out with something even more extreme and unsupported. Listen, we live, there's a lot of stuff in this world. There are supply chains breaking down. There are a lot of indications that we could be in the midst of a very serious worldwide famine and not too long into the future. Putin is threatening nuclear war. He shot off his big missile that's called Satan the other day, which is one of the most powerful nuclear weapons on the planet. So listen, we live in a world that is very, very troubling. I mean, it is a world where it's easy to get very, very anxious. We need to know, though, that God is in control. And if you're secure in him, it doesn't really, eventually it works out great. Now, maybe some pain and suffering, but let's pray that all that is done, whatever we go through is done to the glory of God. But and by the way, I've had a water filtration system in my house for 3 decades. Okay. So I don't necessarily trust the water systems anyways. So I've made a practical decision in my life and the economic thing to say, I need that. Right. And look, it's always interesting. I remember the William F. Buckley once was, he smoked, and somebody said, Dr. Buckley, if you keep smoking, you'll die of a heart attack, or if you do this, you'll die of a heart attack. And he goes, well, if I stop doing it, what am I going to die of? Because he's probably going to die. And is it going to be really long and painful and everything? And, am I going to, am I going to ruin any little enjoyment I have in life to die happy, I guess is the way they do. And I don't want to say you just should live like crazy and everything.
Sure.
But the point is that, we got to be very careful with how we approach these things. And so I think that not getting more shrill and that type of thing when people aren't really listening to us is the way to go. And that's the way that Dr. Corey and some of the other doctors who've worked with Dr. Ardis have come out and said, this just isn't making sense to me, and I'm wasting my time watching this. And these are learned people. So I think we need to listen to those voices. I've read through long articles that have responded to it, that have questioned it. And I don't like it when it gets to sort of an ad hominem type attack, and I said something about, I just didn't think it was very well done. Oh, you're attacking poor doctor. And I'm not attacking poor Dr. Ardis. I'm attacking the video itself. So I think we need to be careful about that.
Yeah. And, people that are not in academia often don't understand that you can attack somebody's work, right? Their research, and say, I disagree with this, but I have nothing against the person, right? And that happens all the time, right? And we have to be very sensitive to that. You're absolutely right. So, oh boy.
Well, here, look at this. Louise is saying that she heard somebody say they could be out of petrol, that would be gas in America, in a month. And it's Louise, I think or D, I guess it is, who says, I was told I shouldn't take Christianity so seriously. No, you should take it very seriously because it's vital. So it's an interesting time, because I could sit here every Sunday when I do these updates, or if I happen to do a midweek one, the stuff that I'm getting is just absolutely crushing. I mean, there are major food problems. And a lot of times it seems like it's being done by design. I mean, I don't know why. I'm still trying to figure out the story. Union Pacific not shipping fertilizer, or giving farmer or the manufacturers of fertilizer a hassle about getting fertilizer to farmers. And it's planting season, and they need that fertilizer, particularly with the way most of the seeds are now, which we can have a discussion about whether that's a good or bad thing, but that's the way it is. And doesn't look like Ukraine's going to plant wheat this year. And over half the wheat in the Middle East, which is one of the most important food staples in the world, comes from that region of Ukraine and Russia. So we're in the midst of a very difficult time. I mean, there's always this dispute. Are the seals opening yet, or are they not? I don't know. I think at a minimum you can say the horsemen are mounting up. That's for sure. And whether the seals they've started riding or not, that's up for debate. I don't think they have, but that's for a number of reasons. But man,
yeah, and we should always
keep a crazy world.
We got to keep in mind that until it gets worse than World War II, we're not near the end. I mean, World War II was horrific. And I think it's, with history, it's easy to just kind of forget this. But had you been living at that time, you could have easily made an amazing case that Hitler is the Antichrist. And this is
sure.
And I would be like, you know what? You might be right, because you had all kinds of life-changing, world-changing events. And it really did seem, at least from the American perspective, it seemed like it was good versus evil. And you had, of course, the Holocaust, 6 million plus, mostly Jews, but other people as well, that were killed in that. It was horrific. So look, we're not even close to that. So this is where,
but when it starts to unfold, Doug, it will happen very quickly.
I hear you. I agree. I think, like the way you put it, maybe the horsemen are mounting up, they're putting the saddles on, they're in the barn getting ready. That very well could be. But again, I think, and especially when I was a pre-tribber, I mean, I wanted everything to happen now, right? It's now. This thing has to be it, because doggone it, Jesus is going to take me out here any second. And I just think we lose a lot of good living when we do that. The God wants us to be here. He wants us to be involved. And yes, let's keep our eyes on the sky and the events that are coming and happening. Absolutely. But, let's also be good neighbors. Let's be, people that are kind and considerate and helpful and all that. Right. So there has to be that balance. Otherwise, we are really not doing what the Lord told us to do.
Right. And it is a world where everything happens. It seems to happen with much more speed than anything. I mean, this, like you talked about transhumanism. I was watching Harari the other day, and he's talking about, hey, we're now at the place where we can design human evolution.
Right.
Because we're but then he will sit there and say, there's no intelligent God that's designed things, but now we are gods that we can design.
Right. The transhumanists come out and say there is no God but man, and they want to transform everything into the image of man. I mean, they're coming right out and saying this. I mean, oh gosh, what's his name? Works at Google. One of the big transhumanists, Ray Kurzweil. Right. So he was once asked in an interview, do you think God exists? He says, well, no, not yet. I'm like, oh my goodness.
We haven't created him
so, just so much chutzpah to say that not yet. I mean, oh my goodness. You just want to
remember the time cover from about 10 years ago, 2045, the year man becomes immortal.
Yeah.
And they don't even accept that anymore. They're like, it's 2030 or before. I mean, there was just in the news today that Meta, Facebook, is building a couple more big buildings out here near us, data centers, and then one's, I think, dedicated to artificial intelligence. So, and that's the metaverse. And I'm seeing that. I mean, I'm reading articles this week about militaries are designing things to fight wars in the metaverse. There are law firms that have practice groups that are designed to set up real estate purchases, the equivalent of real estate purchases, and that sort of thing. They're setting the rules for that to buy things in the metaverse. So it's just it's here, and look, the farmers I talk to that communicate with me, you would not read what I'm sent to me, and I bless them for sending it to me, and I read them, and I'm just telling you is you would run to the store if you got the emails that I got, and I think everything that they're telling me is backed up. So we're living on the verge of, maybe there'll be a reprieve. Maybe we're like at the end of the birth pang that's really intense, and there'll be a short reprieve. But I don't expect anything to go back to normal at this point.
I hear you. Well, I just want to say, got my water. I'm going to drink it. So I would encourage people.
Scott's ill tonight, and Scott's not here tonight, and he's ill, and we're not sure if he drank water or not. So.
Yeah, I think the water is safe insofar as there's not snake venom, that kind of stuff. Now, you might want to drink filtered, right? And that, that's wise. A lot of there are contaminants, just sort of your everyday contaminants in water. So yeah, be wise about it. But I don't think our water is being systematically targeted with the mark of the beast or something like that. I think it would be, there's that's one of the other things I talk about, logistics. I think there would be the logistical aspect of making it happen, even for like a city of New York, the water supply of New York, which, cycles through and all this other stuff. It's difficult to do, to get the toxicity to that level. And so maybe that's a blessing in disguise that's why it hasn't happened, because I think there are people that would love to do that. But I don't know that there's the capability to do it surreptitiously on a massive scale. Yeah, on a worldwide scale. I think sometimes here in America, we think this is only an American thing. This is worldwide, right? So if people don't travel, they may forget that there's a big wide world out there, and everybody has had, COVID, right, to different extents, but this was worldwide. So
yeah.
Anyway, just saying.
And I'll talk about this Sunday, the the supply chain disruption with the, I mean, if you look at marinetraffic.com and set it up for tankers and in container ships, it's unbelievable. I mean, the ships are all like stuck in China, which is where a lot of the goods from. Now, that's not necessarily where the food comes from, but we have rail issues and trucking issues and stuff here in the United States. And remember when all the ports out there in Los Angeles were full? There's hardly any ships out there now waiting to unload.
Wow.
And that's not a good sign either.
Right. Yeah.
So I've never seen anything like it. It's kind of a crazy world. If I didn't know where I was going, I would be nervous.
Yeah, I have a friend who ships like huge quantities of cement and other things. So he does a lot of shipping and supply chain, and he's like, it's a mess. He says people don't understand, but in 6 months, it's gonna be just nuts. So, not looking forward to that.
Well, that's good to know. Well, thanks for that upbeat note. Well, you didn't think we were going to get. By the way, Sojourner. That's a great comment. The mark has to be voluntary and the water supply is not voluntary. And that's the problem that I've had with some of this discussion over time. There was this video that circulated that was supposedly Bill Gates speaking at the Pentagon back in 2004. And I in one of my updates, I debunked it because of the quality of the video and what I knew video quality was like back in 2004. But the theory advanced in that video was that, and I think maybe, Doug, we talked about this on one of these updates, that the theory was that the Department of Defense had determined that there was a God gene, and they were going to give a medication or a shot or a vaccine or something like that to people that would interfere with their God gene. So that way we could get rid of the Islamic terrorists who, had this wrong conception of God and were causing all the problems. But we could, and the problem with the video was the God gene has never been found. It's just been a subject of some speculation in some group, in some publications. And so, but then the whole theological question is, did God design us so that we would somebody could give us a pill or a shot or a glass of water and destroy our ability to come into a right relationship with him by believing in the full, finished, complete work of Jesus Christ on the cross? And my contention was, I have a massive theological problem with that kind of theory because it's against the God of the Bible that I read.
Right. Yep. It's a good point. Yep. You gotta, this is going to be free will. So, this has been awesome.
I guess we finished up the time.
I think we did. Yes, we did. This has really been fun. Thank you everybody for tuning in.
And if you want to contact us about things you might like to see us discuss in the future, that's always, because sometimes we're kind of scrambling around for ideas, but it's, we talk, we're all talkers and we don't have trouble filling up the hour usually. So
I'll put my email in the chat if people want to write to me. Don't, and
you can get mine off the
don't spam me, but
fbchapel.com website.
Okay.
So
so there it is, Doug Hamp at Gmail. But
and complaints go to Scott Harwell.
Yes, exactly. That's a different department. All right. Well, thank you everybody. We're so glad you tuned in.